GYAN 2025 on the theme, A New Vision for Saudi Arabia. The region, as we know, is undergoing drastic changes and transformation. And Saudi Arabia is, it's not new for a country like Saudi Arabia as well, because Saudi Arabia is also undergoing massive change. And this transformation is, from an economic perspective, it's going to be a big change for the country. Today's topics that we are going to deal with is economic transformation in the first series of the lecture today. And the second series will talk about Vision 2030. To discuss these issues, we have with us a very esteemed guest who have been with us for last 2-3 days, Professor Joseph A. Kishishian. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. We welcome you again.
Thank you.
And I may now request Sir to begin his talk. Thank you, sir.
Welcome back for day 3. I'm glad to see so many of you back. We're halfway there, another 2 days other than today. So hopefully today's presentations will be as engaging as the ones before. Now, of course, as I'm sure you know already, I'm not an economist by training. I'm a political scientist, but economy is very important. But what I thought I would do, not just throw numbers at you so that you figure out what's going on. You can always find the numbers online. But to talk about what economic diversification really means in the new context. And even when I talk about Vision 2030 in the second part of today's presentation, I also want to familiarize you with the kind of feeling that Vision 2030 has created. We're talking about economy, but we're also talking about the law. We're talking about reforms. We're talking about political affairs. We're talking about a plank, albeit an economic plank, but it is changing the society at every level in the name of the economy. In other words, the economy itself is the engine that will change the entire society. So that's the purpose of what I'm going to do today, so that you know where I'm coming from. So let's move right away. Vision 2030 has its main objective the transformation of a rentier economy to a production economy. So far, Saudi Arabia has been a rentier economy, collecting rent from oil, selling oil, collecting the rent, selling oil, collecting the rent. That makes it a rentier economy. Rentier is a French word, R-E-N-T-I-E-R, rentier, someone who takes in, collects rent. A rentier is someone who collects, right? A rentier economy is the non-productive economy. You don't produce anything. You just export, right? So Vision 2030 wants to take this rentier economy and transform it into a productive economy, production economy, which is really a must-do for the kingdom in order to maintain its standard of living instead of following just putative declines in oil rents. As you know, the price of oil goes up and down. So sometimes you make a lot of money when the price of oil is $110, and then other times you make very little money when the price of oil is only $10 per barrel. So therefore, a rentier economy is a bad news for the standard of living, because you have to maintain a standard of living. Mohammed bin Salman, who is the author of Vision 2030, is fully aware that everything in the kingdom has to change so that nothing changes. Everything must change so that nothing changes. Let me repeat that for the third time. Everything must change so that nothing changes. By that, I mean the traditions, the system of government, the political setup, Al Saud rule, religious establishment, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, he came up with modification of rules that govern the economy and the environment, a move that is wrapped up in normalization of the country as a whole, which is swiftly being translated also in the legal system, about which I will say a lot more tomorrow. It seems that Mohammed bin Salman has figured out how technical solutions will not be enough to solve the social problems that hamper the Saudi economy, mainly because of an obscurantist and anachronistic interpretation of religion. Because you cannot develop tourism economy while refusing to issue tourist visas. So he figured that out. If we want tourist economy, if we want to bring tourists in, we have to give them visas to come in. You cannot assume that you can change the economy and on the other hand, you're not allowing people to come in, right? So he figured that out. Moreover, it's impossible to promote a cultural economy if morality prohibits music, and how to increase the female labor force if you hinder women's access to public spaces. So therefore, you have to address these challenges. Consequently, it will be fair to ask whether there are any ways to increase foreign investments if foreigners reject the conditions of living in Saudi Arabia. Likewise, can private initiatives flourish while held back by multiple obstacles in mentalities? These examples could be multiplied, though in a nutshell, it is critical to underscore that the economy is not only about economics, neither is it about laws governing the economy. Moving the Saudi citizen from the state of passive consumer to that of an actor of development implies the creation of a new society. In other words, if you want a diversified economy, you have to recreate the Saudi society, which is what he intends to do. In the kingdom, as elsewhere, it is social change that leads to the evolution of the law and not the other way around, which are concerns that we will talk about next. Saudi society has gone through an anthropological revolution since 2016, which has not translated into politics since power remains unchanged. It's still a monarchy, it will remain a monarchy. Nevertheless, authorities have modeled their policies on this profound move, which they espoused and tried to better achieve their objectives. Therefore, Vision 2030 is the implicit economic translation of what he intends to do. The vision draws a framework under an economic guise of neoliberal conviction, with a view to anchor reforms in a sustainable future and to set a course without alienating the mass of non-politicized conservatives so as to prevent a return to the anachronistic past. Vision 2030, as circulated to the public, has nevertheless not detailed every single reform, every single norm that has been planned, which is gradually dripping to the conservative society. In other words, he did not from day one come and say, we're going to do A, B, C, and you have no choice but to accept A, B, C. Instead, what he said, we're going to do A, we're going to do B, we're going to do C. We'll take our time to do A, we'll take our time to do B, we'll take our time to do C. Very careful management of the reforms that he intends to introduce for the country. In other words, he is looking at the long-term initiative. Even though Vision 2030 is supposed to be completed by 2030, as I have mentioned yesterday and before yesterday, this is not going to be completed in 2030. It might be 2040, it might be 2050, it might be 2060. It's a long-term project. Legal reforms in Saudi Arabia respond to the country's global change and therefore must reshuffle the entire judicial system as well. You cannot have economic reforms without judicial reforms, because nobody is going to come and invest in your country. No foreign direct investment, FDI, no foreign direct investment will come. Nobody is going to put $100 million in the economy when they know that the laws don't protect them. So if you want to diversify the economy, you have to diversify the law so that corporations, businessmen are protected, not only for their investments, but also for their employees. If a company, let's say a Japanese company, is going to send 1,000 engineers and assistants to put together a factory to build whatever it is that they're building, computer chips, let's say. Well, you have to make sure that those 1,000 engineers and their family members are protected. And you cannot impose different laws on people. So therefore, you have to have a clear legal framework into which people operate. People must know exactly what are the limits into which they can operate. That's a big challenge that he has taken on. Now, although any law may anticipate a social move, society itself has to accept it for it to be effective. It would be wrong to reduce legal system reforms to a simple tool used by the state to regulate society or to a mere adaptation to the needs of the economy, although these two factors are important. An authoritarian power, like that in Saudi Arabia, nevertheless needs internal legitimacy to implement national moves, chiefly to liberate it from the rigid Salafi norms that existed before. It will seek to improve at the same time its external image, including through reforming the legal system in place. Various adverse international stigmas of Islam and Arabs are removed, and economic diversification, that is the restructuring of society and an adaptation of the country to the international standards, must go hand in hand. You cannot assume to do the kind of reforms all by yourself. You have to make sure that you meet global standards. If you want foreign direct investment to come from Japan, you have to make sure that Japanese standards are respected as well. If you want German companies to come and invest in your country, you have to make sure that German standards are respected as well. That's why countries get together and have international norms over which everybody can agree. You have to apply those across the board in a blind way. And people in your country, that is the recipient of the FDI, must be willing to say, yes, welcome. You cannot just impose it on people, because presumably the 1,000 Japanese workers that are coming are also going to hire locals in order to help with the factory, to run the factory, to produce whatever goods that it is that you are producing. Therefore, the society at large must also accept the conditions under which you're coming. So this is the kind of overall background that I want to leave for you in this first half. And then, before I go further into the economic nitty-gritty, I want to talk a little bit about the impact of petroleum and the Salafi mentality on economic and social life in the kingdom, and how this is now changing. So I will tell you what the system has been and how this has changed now, so that you know, so that you can make the comparison. I am assuming that most of you don't have this background. If you do, forgive me. And if you have questions, please, during the question and answer period, I'll be more than happy to elaborate on them. In 1857, if you go back only 200 years, Arabia was a land of famine. People actually went hungry in Saudi Arabia. There was not enough food. In 1950, 150 years later, life expectancy was only 39 years old. Most people died by the age of 39. This is very low, which meant that this was cruel past. Always keep that in mind when you evaluate contemporary Saudi Arabia. What has happened less than 50 years ago to compare to what is going on today. The rapid growth that has taken place the gross domestic product has increased between 1950 and 2000 8 times. 8 times GDP increase over a period of very short period of time. Less than 50 years, maybe 30, 40 years, 8-fold increase, although in a hierarchical way. Of course, this was the case in oil-producing countries elsewhere, throughout the Gulf, North Africa, and Africa as well. And in fact, at one point, the discovery of oil was considered to be a black poison. It was not even good for you because most people didn't benefit from it. Its perverse effects have seriously hurt the economy, though Unitarianism did as well. Saudi Arabia used to be a country where state religion legitimized uneconomic behavior through prioritizing religious activities over work and erecting multiple bans that have hindered development. In other words, when you spend your entire day preoccupied with religious activities, you don't have time to work and be productive and develop the country. The priority was entirely different, and before the oil was discovered, of course, there was no need to do anything else. But with the introduction of oil and the increase in development projects, everything has changed. Again, Unitarianism, I'm using Unitarianism, but I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with the Wahhabi tradition. As I mentioned to you the past 2 days, Wahhabism is a pejorative term. Saudis don't use it. In Saudi Arabia, when you say somebody is a Wahhabi, it's like you're insulting them. They're Muslim. The fact that they follow Muhammad Abdul Wahhab and the Hanbali school is just that. But when you say you are a Wahhabi, that means that you are less than anything that I can think of, that you're not worth much. It's an insult more than anything else. But unfortunately, most writers have gotten lazy, and they use, in academia and in journalism, laziness is the common denominator. I want you to know that. Most people don't do their homework, unlike you, all of you. How do I know this? You're here. You're here, that means that you're doing your homework and you're studying. So that means you're different. And that's a good thing. And I'm very happy and very proud. Thank you for being here. Now, obviously, the prescriptions in those days pointed to the moment when the country discovered the extent of its economic problems because they have partially caused it, or conversely, because oil rent has allowed it a stay of time. They could afford not to develop because oil money was coming in, and it was easy money. You didn't have to work. You just dug the well, oil came up, and you exported it. You got the cash. You bought whatever you wanted. You didn't have to produce anything. You didn't have to work anything, which unraveled what Saudi Arabia's economic difficulties were. Oil rents is proving as very difficult to sorting out religion and traditions in the social imbalances. Wahhabi traditions encompass both. It's a type of Salafism that was as much habitus as religious, which has come to dress up a political anthropology to a totalitarian nature. In 2017, at an international economic forum in Saudi Arabia, organized to present Vision 2030, Mohammed bin Salman declared, quote, "We must put an end to extremism and ensure that Saudi Arabia regains its moderate Islam as of before 1979, an Islam open to all religions and to the whole world. One cannot live another 30 years with all these destructive ideas. We are going to demolish them today." End quote. The first thing that he did, Vision 2030, economic diversification. Look how foresightful the man is. He wants to have a new economy. He wants to diversify. But he understands what the nut of the problem is: extremism. Extremism that has prevented economic diversification and economic development. Therefore, what he's saying, we cannot continue like this. We cannot have another 30 years of extremism, and we must destroy it. He didn't say we must reform it. He's not going to reform extremism. He's going to destroy it. Those are his words. We cannot live another 30 years with extremism. Recognizing, first of all, that in fact there was extremism, and that second, that extremism did not help. It was not something positive. Right? You follow me? Now, in a way, this was his approach to having an exit of the system in which he was. He was looking for the way out, as the English say. You know, we say exit in America, but the English say way out. You say way out too, right? Yeah, the British legacy in your country, unfortunately. So he was looking for the exit door. He was looking for the way out. And he acknowledged that in fact he needed a way out. Right? Now, interestingly, among the many factors that motivated this vision, it seems that it was the economy that took precedence for him, which listeners present at his presentation in 2017, most of them were business leaders that were invited. They were not linked to any religious matters. Everybody expected to hear this, but it was fair to state that religious norms had gradually conquered all spheres of daily life in the country, to the point that the lifting of the Wahhabi mortgage represented a necessary prerequisite for the launch of the economic restructuring that shaped Vision 2030. No one has ever drawn up the economic balance sheet of extremism and destructive ideas condemned that day. But these were so heavy that we can understand Mohammed bin Salman's desire to demolish them. Though impossible to evaluate, the Wahhabi bill for Saudi Arabia must have been in the hundreds of billions of dollars, if no one has ever quantified the losses caused by the closure of stores during prayer times, for example. Wahhabi traditions can thus be viewed as a luxury in a rentier state that has become anachronistic at a time when the return to economic rationality and of the march towards the post-oil era became necessities. The anti-modernism of Wahhabi traditions went hand in hand with the rentier logic and was and is incompatible with a diversified economy. In truth, fundamentalism impoverished society, while tolerance enriched society. Let me repeat that. Fundamentalism, or extremism if you like, impoverished Saudi society. Tolerance and development enriched a society to move forward. Dependence on oil rent combined with Salafi traditions alienated society from work in general, transforming the individual from an active producer to a passive consumer. Oil Salafism, or if you like, we can call it petro-Salafism, petroleum Salafism, led to a culture of negligence, of irresponsibility, and of defiance that paralyzed initiatives and hindered the administration of the country, whose inefficiencies were hard to imagine for many years. You could just simply not go on like that. Any Saudi facing a problem no longer wondered how to solve it, but instead turned to the immigrant worker who could do that for him. He didn't have to work. He could hire an expatriate worker. You don't have to work. If you're a rentier person, why work? You hire somebody to work for you. Unlike the underdeveloped Gulf Emirates elsewhere at the time, Saudi population is relatively large. You know, for example, the entire population of Kuwait was less than 1 million. Now, yesterday I spoke about demographics, and you know the numbers. Saudi Arabia is a huge country and the population is growing. We're not talking about 1 or 2 million people here. We're talking about right now 33, 34 million, and in the next generation, that number is going to double from 50 to 60 million people. So therefore, it's very easy to say that in a small population, you can get away with a lot of things, but in a large population, you can't. You have to have people working. In fact, the whole Saudization came up against rigid rentier structures and the general absence of a culture of work dominated for a long time. Most Saudis were hardly aware of the extent of the problem because of a lack of external benchmarks and in the oil boom era of a general laissez-faire trend. They were even proud of their conditions, since the ulama, the doctors of law, the religious leaders, forming the intellectual elite of the country, assured them that everything was okay. No need to worry about it. Just continue to pray. You don't need to work. Just pray. Praying is a very good thing. I'm a believer. I want you to guys know that. I pray too. But I also work. Prayer is very good. It makes me feel very good. I do not just my obligations, but I'm also happy with myself and with my Creator. But I also need to work. I also need to be productive. God does not want me to be lazy. But the mullahs want me to be lazy. The ulama want me to be lazy so that I follow them. So I become a slave to the system. Anyway, that's my personal interjection there. Forgive me. Forgive me. Sometimes I cannot help myself, but to add in a few of my perks, you know, that's the privilege of being a speaker. I shouldn't abuse it. I know. I apologize. Equally important, the anti-productive or even destructive doxa of these extremists represented a mental obstacle that curbed initiative and industrial development in favor of trade, sanctified, obviously, because people assume that you don't need to be productive. All you have to be is to be a tradesman. You don't need to produce anything. Just buy and sell. Be a tradesperson. And why do they say that? It's because the Prophet was a merchant. The Prophet, remember, the Prophet was a merchant. Okay? And his wife Khadija hired him precisely in order to run her business. Right? So therefore, being a merchant was considered to be a positive thing. So if you're a tradesperson, that's good already, because the Prophet practiced trade. Therefore, you don't need to be productive in that sense of producing things yourself. You don't have the kind of different kind of work was acceptable. Now, of course, this is a very harsh thing to say on my part, but I have to be honest about it. This is exactly the reality of what happened in the past. Now, we can imagine the task that the heir apparent Mohammed bin Salman faced, which consisted in making Saudis generally aware of the impasse that they were in, that all of a sudden the rentier state society that was created in Saudi Arabia had strayed very far away from productive economy. Therefore, it was important to have an evolution of mentalities, which was a significant challenge for him. How do you reprogram people to think that it is important for them to become productive once again? And to change the mentalities of what it is that we're supposed to do, not just collect rent, but to actually add value, to create wealth. That requires a mental transformation, not only a policy. You know, you can have the policy, but that's not enough. You need to have people change their mentalities to approach work in a different ethical approach. Now, drawing up a progress report on Vision 2030, when he was talking on the 5th anniversary of the announcement, that is in 2021, just 4 years ago, Mohammed bin Salman identified that his priority had been to reform and centralize governance to combat mismanagement, irresponsibility, incompetence, corruption, and he estimated that 2015 was quite a difficult year. He said 80% of the ministries at that time were not efficient. His own words, not mine. He recognized that when he announced this in 2015, he acknowledged that 80% of the ministries were not doing their job, essentially. Okay? He wanted to address mismanagement, irresponsibility, incompetence, and corruption. And even more costly, but of course difficult to quantify in terms of numbers, was the damage caused by extremist fundamentalism to the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of Saudi Arabia. The delay recorded, for example, in archaeological matters, the neglect of vernacular cultures, and in general, the suspicion or even repression of individual initiatives and of the various fields of cultural expression, from music to sculpture via cinema and literature. All of these things had to be reintroduced. And I think, most people don't, I'm trying to sensitize you to these issues. For example, music. Let's take music as an example. Music has always been part of Arab culture, Arab tradition. But the fundamentalists after 1979 essentially curtailed music. It was forbidden to have anything in public. And those of you who like music and who listen to Arabic music, it is delightful. It is beautiful. It has the kind of dramatic flair that soothes the soul, literally. Some of it dramatic, some of it popular, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it's something which people have got to be habituated to. All of a sudden, now people were free to actually play music, whereas before it was forbidden when the extremists were essentially in power. Now, in fact, the catalog of prohibitions varied over time, but they expanded, as I say, after 1979, whose leeway in the application of Sharia was very broad, at the expense of anybody who did not share their views. Having no codified legal system, moreover, resulted in inconsistency in court rulings and drawn-out litigation procedures. Consequently, the main victim was the diversity of Islam, which flourished nowhere as much as in its cradle. After raising the magnificent architectural heritages of Mecca and Medina, these extremist regulations eradicated its soul to replace it with concrete, which many objected to, even if merchants and landowners benefited from the transformations. For decades, Saudis have suffered an amputation of their personality under extremist Salafi coercion, with all of its economic, political, social, and psychological consequences. That the Saudi social body was able to resist such a relentless, violent, and destabilizing attack on its culture seemed to be an amazing feat indeed. Now, adapting religion to modernity and no longer the reverse, adapting religion to modernity is one of the basic principles of the economic and social restructuring that is now underway. I want to repeat that so that you understand what I'm about to say next. What is going on now is an adaptation of religion to modernity, not the other way around. Before, it was the other way around. Modernity had to apply to religion. A rentier state had to produce income. Now, creation of wealth is going to be favored. Modernization will take precedence. Creation of wealth will take precedence. Now, the distrust of innovation which has always been perceived, and wrongly, in my humble opinion, as the Trojan horse of Westernization. Let's stop here for 1 second and define terms, because I'm using terms. I'm not sure all of you are following me, but I want to make sure that all of you are on the same page. Oftentimes we use words without really knowing what is it that we mean and where we come from. We talk, for example, about democracy a lot, right? There is no such thing. I want you all to be happily invested in that thought. Democracy is an ideal. Democracy is an ideal form that we all aspire to one day accomplish. The more accurate term would be democratization, a process of democracy, that we are working towards it. Same with modernization. We use the term modernization when we mean westernization. Westernization and modernization are two different things. The Western model does not apply everywhere. It's not for export, even though a lot of Westerners think that they applies to everybody around the world. But that's their prejudice. They come from a prejudicial approach. They think that the Western model is a successful model, therefore it has to apply to everybody. The more accurate term would be modernization, whereby you adopt your own cultural norms to the modernity, whether it's political, whether it's economic, social, etc. You adapt to these processes of modernization. So that's the more accurate term that we're thinking. In Saudi Arabia, there is no westernization. It's a monarchy. And democratization has a totally different meaning, not in terms of democracy. Of course, I'm thinking of you because you're always asking me about Iran. And the same could be said also about Iran as well, because in Iran, there is this West-toxification approach that Iranians are essentially allergic to everything that's Western, because they have their own very proud traditions, and the Persian traditions are very important as well. So there is West-toxification for them. They want to stay away from it as much as possible. Well, in Saudi Arabia, it's the same thing. There is no Western approach. There is no westernization. There is modernization. They want to develop, they want to be part of the global system, but they don't want to necessarily import Western traditions. Now, it is possible to conclude that westernization has really paralyzed initiatives and assigned a country like Saudi Arabia to the function of a consumer society that only imports products. Since Saudi Arabia is a country with many untapped potentials outside the field of hydrocarbons, in the post-2015 opening to foreign investments, that's precisely the purpose of which is to develop vast mineral deposits, foster tourist sites where buried archaeological treasures abound, encourage the cultural economy, which the neighbors in the Emirates, in Qatar, have successfully done, all of which is to expand the economy by creating new jobs from the kingdom's growing indigenous workforce. The only restriction to the entry of foreigners into Saudi Arabia, one of the few countries of the world that did not issue visas until 2019. Saudi Arabia has been issuing visas for only 5 years. Before that, you could not just go in unless you were there on business or Hajj and Umrah. That's it. What this meant was that you lost all that income, all that foreign income. Conversely, the austerity of social life imposed by conservatism has led to enormous indirect costs in travel and foreign spending by Saudis who were looking forward to escape internal pressures. In fact, at one point, Saudis were spending their money overseas rather than at home. in the summertime when it was too hot, entire families would gather their affairs and go and spend 3 months away. Whether it was the wealthy went to Europe, the less wealthy went to Egypt, they went to Lebanon, they went to Syria, and they rented an apartment there or whatever, they spent 3 months there. Well, they spent all that money in those countries. Whatever money they had, they spent over there. They didn't spend it at home. Now, a Saudi can have internal tourism. You can get on a plane in Riyadh and go to Al-Ula. You go to a nice hotel, you spend the money there, you visit the archaeological sites, you contribute to the welfare and the economy of your own country. The money stays at home. You don't, in addition, yesterday I mentioned to you that there were about 13.5 million expatriate workers in Saudi Arabia. Well, in terms of the economy, these 13.5 million people take out of the country every year $80 billion. They repatriate $80 billion. The 2.5 million Indians who are working there are sending to the Indian economy here billions of dollars every year. That money obviously is leaving permanently. It will never go back. That money is a total loss for the Saudi economy. Of course, it is legitimately earned by the workers, and they could do whatever they want with their earnings. It belongs to them. But the economy of Saudi Arabia suffers as a result of that. Mohammed bin Salman is aware of what this kind of economic chain does to the economy, and the need for him to diversify and make sure that this chain is removed from the economy of the country. Now, I think that the country has lost colossal sums of money and many opportunities because of a lack of openness, which discouraged entrepreneurship and indirectly pushed Saudis to invest abroad. This was one of the main reasons for the success of Dubai, incidentally, where Saudi investors and holidaymakers have spent more money than in their own country. They would go to buy apartments there and invest in Dubai. And Saudis divested as much as possible because at home it was austerity measures. They couldn't do whatever they wanted. There were no movie theaters to go to. One could hop on a plane within an hour or 2 hours, you'll be in Dubai. Dubai, as I mentioned to you yesterday, is part of India. Congratulations, you have a colony called Dubai. And you go to Dubai, you do whatever you want. Dubai is a free society. It's a playground. And Saudis have a great time in Dubai. And you can drink as much as you want. You can dance as much as you want. You can go to nightclubs as much as you want. You can have all the parties that you can imagine. You can go to the beach. You can do whatever you want. It's a free-for-all. Same true for Bahrain, incidentally. And Bahrain, it's even easier because you can drive across the bridge. There is a bridge between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. You can just drive and spend the weekend there and come back. For those who are living on the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, in Dammam, in Dhahran, and other cities, it's an hour by car, an hour and a half an hour by car. The bridge is not very long. Anyway, a number of perverse economic effects, of course, resulted from the system of power that was based on the alliance. I'm going over time. Okay. I will conclude in a few minutes and then we open up for discussion. Sure. A number of perverse economic effects resulted, moreover, from the system of power based on the alliance between the Al Saud and the clerical establishment, which I mentioned to you before, from which, of course, the latter, that is the clerical establishment, benefited more. Ensuring religious alliance in the form of subsidies to their institutions and initiatives over time have become serious sources of legitimization, so much so that some of the clerics have taken advantage of this to make their own logic prevail over economic calculations. Obstacles to decision-making have generated mismanagement and immobility aggravated by a political and religious gerontocracy with an interest in preserving the status quo. The weak diversification of the economy was primarily due to its rentier structure, but it also resulted from religious conservatism, especially when the clerics intervened in non-religious matters. That all of this now changed after 2017. Clerics will not like what I'm about to say next. I will repeat that I'm a believer. I have faith. But religion is a good business. You all know that. I am not telling you something you don't know. It's good for business. It is a business. Religion is a business. And in the economy, it plays an important role. It's unproductive, but it makes people feel good. And in Saudi Arabia, this was no exception. They took advantage because they receive all these subsidies. The clerical establishment was well off. They received a lot of subsidies, but that also hurt the economy of the country as a whole. In 2015, with Vision 2030 and the determination that Mohammed bin Salman had, I will repeat this so that you don't misunderstand me. Mohammed bin Salman is a believer too. He is a devout Muslim. He believes in God. He does his prayers. He gives zakat. He does all the requirements of religion, but he wants to evolve. He does not want to live in the 13th century. He wants to live in the 21st century. He wants his society to improve. And he wants no excuses in the name of nothing, in the name whether it's religion or anything else. No excuses to be non-productive. He wants everybody to chip in, everybody to assume responsibility. That's to his credit, in my humble opinion. That doesn't mean that everything that he has done or he is doing or he might do are the correct things. He might make mistakes as well as we go along. But at least he's trying to put the country on the right path. And I don't want to repeat what I said yesterday about women in the workforce as well, but that's another handicap which Mohammed bin Salman became very much aware of, realizing that, you cannot have women not being productive outside of the house. If a woman wants to stay in the house, that's her choice. But if she wants to make a contribution in society, well, the opportunity should be there for her to make that decision. And she should be an important member of that economic empowerment that she wants to add value to. She wants to make a contribution to. Now, and the third one, I mentioned this yesterday as well. The third issue is, of course, corruption. I remind you that in 2017, Mohammed bin Salman had a whole bunch of people arrested, and ministers, princes, members of the ruling family, they were arrested and taken to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which is a 6-star hotel, and imprisoned there for several months. And they made deals to return some of the ill-gained fortunes that they had put together. And he insisted that they return the money, and if I'm not mistaken, they got something like $100 billion back into the treasury. All this money that was stifled for one reason or another. $100 billion, that's not small change. That's significant chunk of money that was returned to the state as well. So he's also addressing corruption, which is a reality. Okay, before I stop here, what I want to say two more things about economic diversification. Now, his vision for economic diversification or transformation has created a dilemma between, as I said, the conservative establishment, who insisted that Sharia should not be codified, And as you already know, he is codifying it, right? And on the other hand, he understands the reality that the state must not be in the business of religion. You have the conservative movement that insists on keeping religion on top of the agenda, and he is saying, fine, you do it on the individual level as a believer, but not for the state. He's saying this is not the business of the state. The state is not a church, it's not a mosque, it's not a temple. The church, the mosque, the temple, the religious establishment, all these wonderful spiritual needs that people have must be independent from the state. That's what he's saying. Now, opposing codification was a vested interest, of course, since the more laws are codified, the less judges have the power to shape society according to their will. The discretionary power of judges may thus be said to wither on the proverbial vine, something that received popular approval. Legal reforms, about which a lot more tomorrow, represented one of the main ways to the executive to bring the judicial power to follow the policies of change. The reason why such steps drew massive support among the public, exhausted by tight conservative control after 1979, when the clerical establishment saw its influence expand, was the reason why Vision 2030 was received with open arms. In short, mismanagement, disorganization, irresponsibility had reached such levels that it dried up resources that were sequestered the whole system, which therefore required radical reforms around a new rational economic paradigm. Mohammed bin Salman looked at Saudi Arabia and he said, I don't like what I see. In plain English, I don't like what I see. I see impoverishment. I see mismanagement. I see corruption. This is not going to help us. If we continue along this path, we are surely going to sink, and we will not be able to do anything meaningful for the future of the country. Therefore, the time has come to change everything. And I repeat what I said at the beginning. Everything must change so that nothing changes. Why don't I stop here and ask for questions, and then we'll continue in the next part on the Vision 2030 itself. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving a very analytical perspective on how the new kingdom is unfolding itself. May I ask for some questions from the audience, please, now? You can raise your hand. Okay, Shoaib. You can use it.
Sir, thank you for providing us with this comprehensive insights. Sir, my question is, as you mentioned that Wahhabism is considered as a pejorative term in context of Saudi Arabia, like people don't like themselves to be called Wahhabis. So, but at the same time, we see a sort of contradiction wherein a lot of money has been pumped in past by Ministry of Islamic Affairs to spread that particular form of Islam in countries like Indonesia or Pakistan or Bangladesh. And the local form of Islam in these countries like Indonesia has very particular form of Islam. So this has been like it is evident that this has been like despised and been considered as something un-Islamic, the local practices. So don't you like what is your opinion on this, that these things, this although this is considered as a pejorative, but at the same time the same ideology is tried to be propagated in this Southeast Asia or South Asia.
Take three at a time. That way I'm not confused.
Thank you, sir. I have, I think, two questions. First is about the argument that the Saudi is trying to separate religion and the state, but the very foundation of Saudi Arabia is that agreement between the religious authority and the ruling monarch. So, how, to what length, and how it's gonna happen that religion and religion and state can be separated in Saudi Arabia? And within this context, if we look at that, is this whole idea of state as a Westphalian, because Islam doesn't provide the concept of state, and Christianity managed to do all these things because there was reform within the Christianity. So while you reforming, or you make while you doing all those reform at the state level, is it the mean that it's gonna to affect the definition of the religion also? And yeah, I think I remember this one only. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for such an intriguing lecture. Yeah, I am Plaksha. I am a second-year master's student. I wanted to know your perspective on instrumentalist view of women. Why I say this is because over the years we have seen countries easing out restrictions on women only because they need women, and not because, well, they are also humans and deserve basic human rights. So not only this put a burden on women to be useful, but also it instills fear on us ki if in future the states decide we are not useful enough, they can roll back the improvements they have been doing. So thank you.
Let's take these three. And then we'll do it. I will start with the last one, women in the workforce. I will start with the last one, women in the workforce. It's a choice, it's a matter of choice. Unfortunately, women tend to work twice as hard as men. As a man, I have to acknowledge this. This is a reality. I know that all the women around in my lifetime work twice as hard as I have. This is nature. Now, it's unfair. I don't have an answer for you. I'm very sorry. Plus there is the childbearing issue, which is very critical for women. So you have to find the balance. You have to decide what is it that you want to do in terms of your contribution and how you want to make this contribution. It's very hard. I acknowledge that. Do I have an answer? I don't. I really honestly don't. I mean, I have a daughter as well, your age. She's a nurse, by the way. And she works very hard, and she works twice as hard as I do. And that's nature. What can I tell you that you don't already know? I cannot tell you anything else. Now, I want to next talk about this Unitarian, Wahhabi traditions. As I mentioned yesterday, and I'll repeat it again, I think that we have to really step away from the concept that Wahhabism, I'm using that term because you're familiar with it, even though it's a very pejorative term. It doesn't carry the kind of danger that a lot of Westerners associate with it, especially when we're talking about non-Muslim societies. Now, in the Wahhabi tradition is a threat essentially to Shia Islam more than anything else, more than any other Sunni tradition. I mean, you notice, for example, that the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, which is very prominent in Egypt, in Turkey, in Jordan, etc., they're the ones that can coexist with Unitarian traditions in Saudi Arabia. They don't have that much of a problem. But if you happen to be a Shia Iranian opposed to the Al Saud monarchical system, because the Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini was very famous for making all these statements that he wants to destroy the Al Saud family because Mecca and Medina were occupied territories. That's what he said. Mecca and Medina were occupied territories. Well, if you are a Saudi and you're a protector of Mecca and Medina, you're not occupying the country, you're protecting it. You know, that's a different approach. So we have to, you as an analyst, have got to step away from this preconceived notion of what Wahhabi is and what it can potentially do. Somebody asked me yesterday or the day before yesterday about how this impacted on migrant workers that returned to India, for example, after living for a few years in Saudi Arabia, whether they brought with them all these traditions. It's up to you whether you want to bring anything or not. You're an intelligent human being. You have a brain. This is not decoration. It's here for it to be used. So you use it. If you think that Unitarian traditions, Tawheed, is something beneficial to you, good for you. If you don't want it, you don't have to bring it with you. Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid, first of all? Afraid of what? Is somebody holding a gun on your head and telling you, you better be a Wahhabi or I'm going to kill you? Has that happened? It hasn't happened. So you have to be careful about this. Now, the questions about secularization and separation of church and state, which is a Western concept pre-Westphalia. I'm sure you know already that Europe before Westphalia was a zoo. Was a zoo. European powers, they mastered the idea of killing each other. And the wars that they engaged in lasted hundreds of years. 30-year war here, 10-year war there, 100-year war there, killing each other all the time. I don't think there has been a continent as bloody as Europe. If you look at history, Europeans have mastered the art of killing, where they used to dismember people, literally, killing them in chariots, holding their hands, having horses draw, 4 horses go in different directions, and pulling people apart. The civilized British, remember what they have done in Scotland with the Scottish. The longest human occupation, 800 years plus now going. You think it's picnic for the Scots all this time? It was very awful. Westphalia came. Westphalia, the beauty of Westphalia is that people got tired of killing each other. They finally said to each other, enough already, we're getting tired of killing each other, I mean, even the butchers get tired after a while. So they decided separation of church and state, right? Between secularization and modernization, to use those terms that I have identified earlier, right? That does not mean that they are not religious. They're very religious people. And they continued their beliefs on a private basis. But they've decided that they want to take the state out of the religion business. And it has to do, the same thing is happening in Saudi Arabia right now, only for economic reasons. The diversification that occurred in post-Westphalia Europe, which is what's occurring right now in Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries, is precisely that, for economic purposes. No longer for ideological reasons, but for concrete economic benefits. We need to do this in order to allow our members of society to become more productive. And that doesn't mean that we're not religious, we're not spiritual, that we don't pray, we don't do all these things. We do all those things, but we separate. The state is out of the religion business. Now, we call it secularization, right? That's the term that we use, secularization of the economy. That's what it is. It's secularization of the economy only, nothing else. And Mohammed bin Salman is doing that. He's doing a secularization of the economy, period. Nothing else. Next round.
Okay. Any question? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions. First is regarding your connected question based on how the state is trying to detach from the religion. It is a hypothetical question. Will the future king Mohammed bin Salman will give up the title of the custodian of two holy mosques? That is my first question.
Will he give up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Given that he wants to detach state from religion. Second question is, what is the Saudi state has been doing to get rid of the rentier mentality among the youth, particularly through education? Thank you.
Hello, sir. As you mentioned about the Wahhabism, so my question is, what is the difference between the Wahhabism and Salafism? And if there is a difference, then how can we differentiate? Because there are some similarities, and Wahhabis are those who follow the Abdul Wahhab, and the Salafis, that term itself came from the Salaf, that's been the three immediate follower of the Prophet. That's right. So how do we differentiate? And the second question is the codification of the Sharia. Because I think Sharia is not a book, it's an interpretation. So how Muhammad bin Salman will codify? Last few years they have codified, even they have removed some of the Zaif hadiths actually. Those who are weak hadiths. So how will they in the future? Thank you.
Sir, Saudi Arabia first used oil as a political weapon in 1973. So before that, Saudi Arabia's policy was that oil will be not used as a political weapon. But in the present context, do you think that Saudi Arabia will use it as a political weapon in against Western countries?
Another time. No?
In the coming time. Thank you.
So let's address these questions. We'll start with the last one. In 1973 was not the first time when the oil weapon was used. It was used in 1967 first, but it failed at that time. It did not function because the oil-producing countries were divided amongst each other. In 1973, it worked simply because Faisal bin Abdul Aziz, King Faisal at that time, had an understanding with President Anwar Sadat of Egypt in terms of how they were going to go about applying the oil weapon. And the oil weapon was used against only two countries, the United States and the Netherlands only. No other countries were hurt by this business, and only after the United States at that time under the Nixon administration created an air bridge to send weapons from the United States to Israel. Faisal at that time, King Faisal at that time, decided that enough was enough, we're not going to put up with this, and they put the embargo. Incidentally, generally speaking, journalists and academics too always assume that the oil embargo in 1973 was imposed by OPEC. This is wrong. OPEC had nothing to do with the oil embargo. It was OAPEC, the oil Arab producing countries of the Middle East, not OPEC, and not all of OAPEC, because there was one country that did not go along, ironically Iraq. Iraq did not participate in the OAPEC embargo of 1973. And then, of course, later on, the United States decided to attack Iraq and destroy Saddam Hussein's regime. But that's a different matter. Will it occur again? Probably not. It will probably never occur again. because now there are too many oil producers around the world. There is alternative sources of energy that is now available widely: solar, solar energy, wind energy, natural gas, a whole bunch of other alternatives that are being created. Oil does not have the kind of impact that it had at one point. Incidentally, in some countries, oil is wasted for transportation purposes, like in the United States, for example. Most of the oil is used for transportation, whereas in other countries, oil is used for petrochemicals, for plastics, for health reasons, for a whole bunch of other reasons as well. And now there is a big dispute with Russia, and not just over the Russian gas exports, but the big dispute for oil now is for the new discoveries in the Arctic region, where there is potentially a large pool of natural gas and oil. What's going to happen there is anybody's guess. It's going to be very competitive. I don't think that they will see another oil embargo. Those things are gone. Now, will Mohammed bin Salman give up the custodianship of the two holy mosques title? No, he will not. Why should he? It's a winning bet. Why would he want to get rid of something that is beneficial? You want him to be an angel? I mean, are you in the angel business? Tell me. You believe in angels? No, I don't. Okay, but I mean, I believe in angels. I think I have two, one on this shoulder and one on this shoulder. And they're most welcome to stay with me wherever I go. They protect me. But I am not an angel. They are the angels. I want you to know that. That's the difference. I am not an angel. I'm just a simple human being. And he is like us. He is a simple human being. He just happens to be a prince who has been given the responsibility to assume large responsibilities for governance of his country. We wish him well. We wish him success. Sometimes he will work towards the betterment of his society. Sometimes you will make mistakes, like rulers and leaders everywhere around the world. He's no exception. But why would he give up a title like that? I don't think he will. In terms of the youth, as I mentioned yesterday, the youth support him. They like him a lot. They want him to pay attention to them as much as possible. They want him to invest more, to open up more. I mean, if you are a young person in Saudi Arabia, like young people here, like all of you, if you're in your early 20s, you want to have a good time as well. And you're entitled to. You're entitled to enjoy life. You're only going to live once, unless you're James Bond. You live twice. You know, there was a movie, you only live twice, right? But that's James Bond. You're only going to live once. So you're entitled to enjoy yourself. You're entitled to have a good time. You're a human being at the end. Never forget that. Never forget that you're a human being. And he is no exception, and Saudis are no exception. They're the same thing as we are. Now, I go back to the difference between Wahhabism and Salafism. Now, you asked me, this is a very good question, actually. And Sharia, you said Sharia is not a book. Actually, Sharia is not a book, it's several books. It's not the Quran, it's not the Sunnah of the Prophet, but Sharia developed over a matter of 300 years. The four schools of thought in Islam, the four legal schools of thought, as I mentioned earlier, Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi'i, Maliki. These are the institutions that have been created in different societies whereby the dogma was translated into legality. And that's Sharia. Sharia law is compatible law with Islamic doctrine. In other words, the dogma has been translated into norms, into clear, specific norms. It was not codified in one shape. It was codified in four different schools. Plus, you need to add the Shia school, which is the Shafi'i school. So there are five, but only four in Sunni Islam and one in Shia Islam. So therefore, Sharia exists in written form, and it's there for the judges, for the imams and the sheikhs to look at. This is where the problem comes in, because when you look at the text, let's assume that I am a imam, and you come to me and you ask, you have a request for me to issue a fatwa, a decree. You have a question and I'm supposed to answer that. So what do? I look at the dogma, I look at the Sharia and say what the Sharia says, and I interpret it the way I understand it, based on my expertise and my knowledge, on the school that I went, the teachers with whom I have learned all these rules and regulations, and over the years, let's say of 20, 30 years of experience, I have gained the kind of skills and experience that I could interpret it my own way. It's not codified in that sense, in the legal term, as you and I might understand it in the Western legal term. For example, in Sharia law, as I've explained yesterday as well, there are different kinds of punishments that are specified in the Quran and in the Sharia. It's very clear. The hudud, for example, are very different from the ta'zir rules. It's all written down. It's not a book, it's 4 books. And plus all the interpretations that major scholars have added over the years, like Al-Muslim, Al-Mawardi, and others. There are a whole bunch of them. You know, there are libraries of these regulations, libraries that could fill this entire room. So it's not easy business to be a doctor of Sharia. It's very complicated issue. Now, what's the difference between Wahhabism and Salafism? The last point. Salafi traditions are to mimic the companions of the Prophet. Now, those of you who don't know Islamic history, and I recommend, if you're interested in the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, to actually take a semester course on Islam, to learn about Islam as a religion. It will be helpful. Really, it will be very helpful. You will understand what happened during the first 200 years of rule, where there were tribal clashes between the successors of the Prophet Muhammad, with Umar, Osman, and Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was the first one, and you have all these, and they were all related to each other because they all came from the same clan, from the same community, essentially. And even Ali, the Shia leader that separated from the mainstream, if you would like, and created Shi'ism. In fact, it's Shi'at al-Ali, the followers of Ali. All of this existed within a framework of a mentality that is very different. Those are all the Salafis applying the rules as they were 1400 plus years ago. Wahhabi traditions, Unitarian traditions, came in the 1700s with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, when he talked about unity. And I've explained to you yesterday the differences that existed on the Arabian Peninsula, where you had clannish warfare against each other and people interpreting left and right. Abdul Wahhab saw that this was getting out of hand, and he decided to unify them, and he spoke about unity, Tawheed. Tawheed is really what's important, unity. Unity in what? Unity in God. Unity in God. La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Okay, this is the fundamental difference. The tribal traditions versus the unity of Abdul Wahhab. All right, next round.
Okay, any questions?
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your lecture. As you mentioned in the beginning of your today's lecture that Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian regime. And before beginning of Vision 2030, Mohammed bin Salman gained internal legitimacy. So I would like to ask, does authoritarian regime really wants internal legitimacy to pursue any goal?
Excellent question.
Thank you so much, sir. I want to know your perspective that how will Saudi Arabia mitigate the risk of fluctuation of oil prices during its transition to a diversified economy? If Saudi sells more oil to generate quick wealth to put it in other diversified projects, so it will lead to the oversupply of oil in the world, and it could be result in the dropping of oil prices. So I want to know your perspective on this. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, authoritarian regimes need internal legitimacy too. Again, we have to be careful about the terms that we use. Authoritarianism does not mean dictatorship. A dictator does not need legitimacy. An authoritarian regime does. A paternalistic regime does. Saudi Arabia is not a dictatorship. People might assume that it is a dictatorship. It's not. It's an authoritarian regime where it's a monarchy, where there is a single decision maker at the end of the day. But I would add that it is much more than an authoritarian regime. It's actually a paternalistic regime, a father figure, essentially. A paternalistic regime, and they do need internal legitimacy. Why do I say that? Okay, your question is very, very important. It's really, you've put your finger on the hurt, on the wound, literally. Because we have all these misconceived notions about the country. We think, well, it's a dictatorship. He's a dictator. He's a murderer. He does whatever he wants. He can chop people's heads off. He can do this, he can do that. No, there's a price to pay for everything. Consultation is very important. Even though it's not a republic, there is no representative form of government, there are no elections, there are no political parties, still there are members of society that participate in the decision-making process at every level, whether it's at the local level, at the governor level, at the federal, at the monarchical level, where you have actually meetings, people who have a stake in the system participate in the decision-making process. And you better listen to what they have to say. If you don't listen to what they have to say, then you will create fitna in Arabic. You will create the kind of the division in the country that will encourage extremism to flourish. And this is what happened in 1979, before 1979. Where did Juhayman bin Utayba come from? Did he land from heaven? Did he have Indigo Flight 62 from heaven? No, he did not. He was part of that society. Extremism was generated because he perceived that the Al Saud family were behaving in ways that were not in the best interest of Saudi society. Therefore, he created this internal division. And the Al Saud family were awakened to this. They quickly handled it in a proper way. And they not only caught him and executed him, he and his followers, but made sure that extremism was dealt with in an open and free fashion. Therefore, authoritarianism does require internal legitimacy. And during Ramadan, every year, the royal court, moves from Riyadh, it goes to Jeddah and to Mecca. They stay there the whole month. And they perform not just the rituals of Hajj, but they also receive dignitaries there. They have a nightly iftar to welcome whatever, whoever wants to assist. This is part of legitimization. This is internal legitimization. You are showing to the public that you are responsible towards your population, that you are not some alien figure ruling over them, that you are taking care of them. And it's important to keep in the back of your mind that even authoritarian leaders must be accountable at the end of the day. Especially, we're talking about economic diversification, right? We're talking about the importance of economy. Well, if after a period of time, Vision 2030 is now implemented, but let's say, for the devil, I'm playing devil's advocate now. Let's say that 10 years passed, and the economy did not improve, and people did not acquire more wealth, and more jobs were not created. You think he will last in power? He will not. He will not. Mark my words. He will have to respond so that it meets the needs of the population. There is responsibility that goes along with authoritarianism, and in your mind, as you develop your own thinking about these issues, be careful when you separate such thing as dictatorship, authoritarianism, representation. Don't mix everything together. Each one of them is a different context. For example, the generals that rule over Myanmar are dictators. Vladimir Putin in Russia, even though he's elected, is a dictator. I don't mind saying that in public. He's a dictator because everybody is under his control. He can do whatever he wants with them. He goes to war without asking the Russians whether they want to go to war or not. Mohammed bin Salman is not a dictator. He's an authoritarian leader. He has a plan. This is my plan. And I want you to follow this plan because it's good for us. But he has to deliver. Yeah.
So there was a question about oil.
About oil.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot about oil. See, it's good that it reminds me. I'm an old man, I forget. Fluctuations in the price of oil. Yes, this is a real dilemma. Every time price of oil fluctuates, Saudi economy loses a lot of money. When the price of oil goes up, obviously the income is tremendous. When the price of oil goes down, they lose a whole bunch of money. Now, compared to the pre-2015 period, today Saudi Arabia makes between 50 and 60% of its income only from oil. So about 40% now is from non-oil generated income. And that gap is growing. Every year that passes, more money is coming from non-oil resources. And Vision 2030's objective is to make sure that the income from oil goes further down as the income from non-oil resources go up and up and up. We will see what happens because fluctuating oil prices are not in the interests of a booming economy like Saudi Arabia. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll close this session and we'll gather here in half an hour or so. Let's have tea outside. Thank you.